Hello, welcome to the Liberty North Show. Today we are excited to have guests on Marin and Margot from Indie Birth. Today we're going to be talking all about birth and midwifery. It is a world that we are exploring on the Liberty North Show because it is at the foundation of much of the fifth generation warfare that we are covering. So we are glad to have you on, Marin and Margot. I wanted to start by you guys telling your story because it is foreign to a lot of people, but it's becoming more and more, let's say, mainstream because of people like you and the work you're doing. So maybe just get started on how you guys, got into this world and your experience in it, please. Whoever wants to go first, maybe Marin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Thanks for having us, you guys. This is really exciting and feels really important always to get a chance to share our stories and the work we're doing. So, I got into the world of home birth with our second baby, actually. The first baby was born in a hospital, typical scenario, didn't know there was anything different. And it became clear there was something different. So after that first home birth, I got interested in midwifery, which wasn't something I knew anything about. I was completely green. I wasn't aware of any of the politics or any of the ways to become a midwife. I just knew that after witnessing my midwife at my birth, that it was something I felt really strongly about, that women have this option, that they also had the chance to feel as powerful as I did. And that midwifery journey was about 5 years of training. So 5 years of apprenticeship, following midwives around all over the US, moving a bunch of times, and finally settling at the end of my training in the state of Arizona, which is a mandatory licensing state here in the US. So licensing for home birth midwives has been around a long time. And I was naive. I thought that a license would protect me and my family. I thought it would make me a more legitimate midwife. I maybe even thought it made me safer. All of these things have come to be untrue, but I didn't know at the time. So I pursued the license, which, is money and lots of time and effort and testing. And I got the license. And as I began to work as a licensed midwife, I realized so much. I realized where my loyalty needed to lie. I realized how the government was controlling this natural process of birth, even through midwives. So the practice of midwifery, when it's licensed, generally speaking, is fairly medicalized. Usually there's a medical board that oversees the rules and regs. So long story short, I had an incident where a doctor reported me to the local, a doctor from a local hospital reported me to the licensing board, and not for a bad outcome, simply was angry that midwives exist, that women are allowed to choose home birth. And because I was a new midwife, they kind of made an example of me. And I willingly entered into it. I could have lied. I could have made up a story, but I fought them on it. I really, even at that time, knew deeply in my soul that we are sovereign beings and that any woman anywhere should have the option or choice of choosing whoever she wants at her birth. So after several years in a battle with them, it was very costly. It was very stressful. They tried to settle. They said, we'll let you keep your license, but you have to do these things. And I just really had an epiphany of sorts. I had my sixth baby at the time. He was a free birth. And I just came out of that birth like a different person. And I knew deeply that I could never serve the government again as a midwife, that it didn't align with my soul, and that, I would sort of die if I had to continue to honor that over the woman in front of me. And so I didn't know how I would do it, what I would do. I just knew that wasn't for me anymore. So I wrote the state of Arizona a letter, which you can still find online. It's a really good letter, where I gave them back the license and just told them, women don't want this. You can try to control birth, but you actually can't. So good luck to you. And thank you for all of these really amazing lessons. I was actually, and I still am, super grateful. I would never be where I am without this experience. So I saw it for what it was. The light was very brightly shown on the truth of control of women's bodies and the control of midwifery. And I wanted nothing to do with it. So that is kind of the point at which I feel Indie Birth really started. Margot will share her story, but that's kind of the basis for many of the foundational beliefs and philosophies that we hold and what our school is built on.
Right. You have a school at Indie Birth. It is a school of midwifery, and it's going around the licensing saying F you essentially to that board. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into, I'm sure, just the differences and the way we feel that what we've created and what we live is just this much fuller version. That medicalized midwifery is really a series of checks and boxes. There's not a lot of creativity or critical thinking that go into that. And that's not what midwifery is. It's not what it ever has been. It is really an ancient art and tradition. So, we live in modern times, but we are trying to recreate it to the best of our ability to, be that ancient art that honors this sacred rite of passage. That's what birth actually is. It's not a medical emergency. And we're training women to be able to be with that. So they need emergency skills, sure, but they need a lot more, and a lot more support and self-exploration that normal medicalized midwifery education doesn't offer. That's all.
Okay. We'll get more into that, I guess. I got Margot, if you want to go ahead, please. Your story.
Sure. Yeah. So my story is a little different, and it's actually kind of different than like a lot of stories in terms of how people get into midwifery. I became interested in midwifery long before I actually had babies myself. So I was a graduate student studying applied criminology, and I had a bachelor's degree in women's and gender studies, and sociology. So I very much was sort of coming out of this period in my life where I had been sort of like a hardcore liberal, and then had gotten exposed to a lot of really interesting anarchist thought and indigenous activism here in Arizona. And so I was sort of having this renaissance around like, what did I actually think about how to make the world a better place? And I knew I wanted to work with women. I thought that was in sort of the field of domestic violence policy work, and just knew partway through my first semester in grad school that was not true. And so long story short, I knew somebody who was a doula. And so I started this like deep internet dive into like, what is a doula? What is a midwife? What is this home birth thing? And just read everything that I could get my hands on within like a matter of weeks, and realized like, this is what I'm meant to do with my life. This is where I think I could make the biggest change in the world for women in a way that feels really true to like my heart's calling. And so I, through amazing serendipity, was introduced to Marin, and we met a few weeks after I had this sort of like crisis of identity. And she was very cool about it, and was like, yeah, you can come along to some prenatals and see what this is like. And I was 21 at the time, so I was pretty young in terms of like people getting into midwifery. It's usually like after they've had a few babies and they're older. And so I was very, very green. I knew nothing about birth, but I just knew that this was the right path for me. And I guess I could show you too. So I have this, I don't know how I can, the mirroring thing is confusing. I have this, I cannot figure out how to show you.
We see it.
Yeah, okay. I have a red woman symbol tattooed on my arm, and I got it the year I turned 21. And when I Googled Marin, after someone told me I should, her website popped up, and it was a red woman symbol as her logo. And I was just like, this is so weird and totally meant to be. So yeah, I started going to births with her fairly quickly after that. And the birth where Marin was reported to the state was actually the third birth that I attended with her or ever. And so our journeys really collided at this really interesting moment. And I guess the other part of this is that when I sat down with her for the first time, I had expressed that I didn't think I wanted to have a license ever. Again, I was really heavily influenced by like some anarchist and libertarian stuff that I was learning about. And I was like, yeah, I want to serve women and I don't want to serve the government. I want no part in that. And even though Marin was licensed at the time, was extremely cool about that and open to seeing how that might look and how that might go. And then all this stuff happened with the state, and it just all felt, I don't even know how to describe it. So we also talk a lot about this in our book, which is Indie Birth, A Story of Radical Birth Love. If people want to hear like the long book version of it, but that's the gist of it. I got into midwifery young before having kids. And then I have since had 2 children, and Marin was my midwife at both of those births. And just to sort of bring this back around and maybe help us with a segue here, my first birth with my daughter, who's about to be 10 this summer, we counted how many rules would have been broken by a licensed midwife if a licensed midwife had been in attendance at my birth. And it was like 9 or 10 rules would have been broken because I have all kinds of different stuff in my health history. I was in labor a super long time. I pushed for forever, on and on and on, right? Like I had all these reasons that I would not have been allowed to have a home birth.
Can you give a couple examples of some of those rules?
Yeah, I mean, the most clear one to me is the pushing one. So in Arizona, you're not allowed to push for more than 2 hours. And I pushed for probably close to 9 on and off.
That's a workout right there for sure.
Yeah. And it was like a 66-hour labor. So, just the time itself was not allowed, right? My body did it wrong. And so
what would happen? You would technically have to go to the hospital in that case?
Well, a licensed midwife would never have been able to even let me try to have a home birth because of my history with, and at the time having some high blood pressure stuff going on. So I would never even have made it to labor. I would have been kicked out probably around 26 weeks of pregnancy. They would have said, sorry, you have to go to the hospital because your blood pressure is getting too high. And if I'd gone to the hospital, I would have been, I know this for a fact, this is not like speculation because I actually met with a doctor to consult about my blood pressure. And he said, well, I really recommend you come here and birth with me. And you would have to have an epidural. You could not use the water at all. You cannot eat. And we would induce you by 37 weeks if you get that far. And I think I was 34 weeks when I saw him. He said, I think you're probably going to get preeclampsia before then. So you'll be lucky if you make it to 37 weeks. And painted just this very grim picture for me of what my birth would look like, which I knew that at the time. I was already a pretty advanced midwifery student. But for it to be personal like that made it really different. And so often, like when people ask me like, oh, why don't you want to have a license? That's my simple answer for people now is like, I wouldn't have been able to help myself. And I knew a home birth was what was best for me and my baby. And I did it twice. And you better believe I sent a photo to that doctor of me giving birth on my bedroom floor saying, well, actually, I didn't need to be induced at 37 weeks. I did just fine at 40. So, yeah.
That's pretty gangster, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
That's it, though. But that's it. It's this like gangster rite of passage that women are being robbed of, which is like a total upgrade if it's allowed to occur. The benefits of it are like so next level. It's like kind of crazy. Amanda and I were talking about this the other day that, there's sometimes tension with couples because the women are so transformed by giving birth, but the father doesn't necessarily go through the birth as a rite of passage that really like makes him grow immensely in the same scale. And so there can be this like tension, this struggle that occurs if it becomes this crazy upgrade, in your personal evolution for the woman, but the father is not able to like use it in the same way. And I just think there's a lot there that's occurring both for couples, but also just collectively. I think, there's a lot to be said there. I think about that quite often.
Yeah, you should ask my ex-husband about that.
Can we have him on? Is that
Let's get him on the show.
But that's the fear, right? I mean, that's the ultimate fear that no one wants to speak of, which is women might actually take their power back and how that would shift the world. You're right. There's nothing more powerful to me. I mean, in my own experience, and I've seen hundreds of women, than not just having their baby at home. There is something more to it than that, than feeling autonomous, feeling like they didn't need to ask, that they, you know, their bodies do know that women have been doing this forever. It's just a remembering. It's a really deep remembering. And I think people are afraid of that.
It's so powerful, though. It gets really to like the spirit of being human. You know, I mean, women have been having births in caves since the time we were in caves. Do we need all of this mechanistic, you know, modern medical machinery that turns you into a machine? Essentially, it treats you as a machine that's just churning out a child, and it's so perverted in so many ways. So to see. You know, it looks to me like there's a revolution happening as well in the homeschooling world, which is amazing to see. You know, taking the kids. So this goes back to also the Rockefellers and feminism. Maybe we could talk about that briefly before we get into midwifery. And you know, obviously there are in the origins of feminism. I mean, any man who respects women is a feminist in the most pure sense. We want equality. Of course, it's silly to think otherwise, but what feminism became is this alteration and this indoctrination into taking really the power away and the beauty of being a mother. It's the most important thing there is. And to see what has happened over the course of the last, let's say, century and a half is very sad, but to see it reemerging and this revolution happening is very beautiful. Can you guys maybe comment on feminism and how that comes into play with the birthing world and being a mother and having children?
Can I jump in with this one, Maren?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know that I have, well, maybe I have a lot to say, but like I said, I literally have a degree in women's studies. So I was like the queen of the feminists.
Okay.
On campus, right? Like my crown, the whole thing. I was on the steering committee for the women's and gender studies department, all of it. I also, yes, I was the golden child of that. So, what I like to tell people though is it's so interesting. I didn't know this until, you know, years later, but in retrospect, after I had graduated and I was studying birth and breastfeeding and getting to know all these amazing women and inspirational mothers, and Maren foremost among them, I realized that during the 4 years of studying women's studies, we did not talk about birth one time in 4 years. We did not talk about mothering one time. We did not talk about breastfeeding one time. And it's just really fascinating to me looking back now. I think, you know, I'm still really grateful for a lot of the things I learned and some of the people I met and ideas I was exposed to. But I think there's a huge missing piece in the feminist conversation. And I find it really problematic. So at this point, I don't know that I even like identify with that word anymore. And a lot of the people that I know who are still in that world, you know, from my like previous life that existed, I'm not even on board with a lot of the work that they're doing. It sort of feels meaningless and like it's not really getting at the root of the issue. And so I think what we're doing here at Indie Birth and in all of our various projects underneath that umbrella is really about more than birth. Like, yes, it's about birth, but it's really about this, you know, raising of feminine consciousness and returning power to women, helping them see their own power and step into it. And so maybe we'll get into this, but like, even though we're both home birth midwives, we're not necessarily like anti-hospital either. Mm-hmm. It's more like, how are women relating to themselves and how are they relating to their babies? And like, what does it look like for a woman to be a woman in our culture today? And how is birth impacting that at the end of the day? So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
It did. I mean, hospitals have their place, you know, modern medicine, allopathic medicine has its place, but it's truly become a medical monopoly, and they've absorbed everything to do with health. But meanwhile, they don't even discuss nutrition. Like
Right.
it's very clearly a mafia-esque approach that has taken place over the last century of, and in many ways it does more harm than good. And maybe we could let's talk about that.
Well,
So
I think too, I want to point something out, because there's something really important that you're highlighting, which is that it's not about a debate. Sort of think
what's
of like,
right or wrong, right?
yeah, like the internet debates where people are like, arguing about hospital versus home birth, and that whole thing that tends to happen.
Yeah.
when, humans are struggling with something like this. And I mean, really what we found was that, the reason we did a free birth here, we had a friend who was a doula, and so we just did a free birth with this friend who was here when Amanda wanted her here. But the whole point was that Amanda actually kept the midwives away for the birth because it didn't feel safe. Whereas I recognize that for some women, like if that's what makes their body feel safe, it's really about like tuning into the body's needs. And like, it is the body being in the correct place that is going to enable this to happen.
Yeah.
And I think this is part of that sort of tricky hang up that we have generations of women that have been conditioned to believe that the hospital is the safe place. And so, it's tough to tell, I think, at this time. That's why I think you rightly pointed out there's a lot of inner work that has to occur for this process. It's tough to tell whether it really is the safe place because that's where the body is directing you, or if that's social conditioning playing itself out, sort of murkying the waters. I think there's an interesting shift happening right in that space.
The soul aspect to it is just completely taken out of it in the modern medical framework. And I'd like to, so when the state's involved in it's very interesting. I haven't actually explored this dynamic of it, but the licensing versus not licensing, when the state gets involved, it becomes very mechanistic and the soul is just taken out of it. And what is there that's more human than giving birth? I mean, it's right. So to each their own. If you want to live in a world that's very mechanistic and have that fun, it's up to you. But it's very interesting that you're talking about anarchy, because the word anarchy has a negative connotation to it, a ring to it. I don't know if you know Michael Malice. He wrote the Anarchist Handbook, and it's basically a lot of what the founding fathers, a lot of the ideas of the founding fathers of the U.S. can essentially be identified as anarchist. Right? It's don't tread on me. It's the government is us. The government is we the people. It's not this foreign thing. It's not this state that is governing us. It is us with self-representation. So this can you speak to this, the licensing side of it? Why? So like, what I thought of when you said that is like, what are they going to arrest you for helping a woman give birth? Like,
Oh yeah,
a woman,
Yeah.
which is insanity.
Oh yeah, it happens all of the time.
Like you as an individual, as a sovereign individual, you can give birth in your home, right? You should be able to. Now, whether or not there's a midwife that is accompanying you, now that becomes, you need a license. If you don't have a license from the government that you have to pay for, then it's illegal. That's mind-blowing. But can you speak to your experience with that? So it seems to me from what you said, Margot, you're not wanting to have a license and being, let's say, I guess it's an apprenticeship from Maren. Did that have an effect on you, Maren, in going the route of not being licensed? Was that already in your mind?
When we first met, definitely it wasn't something I was considering because I didn't share, some of the backstory, which is when I was a student, I worked in an unlicensed state with an unlicensed midwife, and I saw her have her house searched, and I saw her have to run to Canada actually to escape the US legal system. So this was my experience as an impressionable student, and it was highly activating and very frightening as a woman with a family that I would potentially have my house searched as an unlicensed midwife. So truth be told, there was a lot of fear there for me, obviously. And I don't know that I would do it the same way now, but this was a long time ago. So my solution was to get a license. So it's not to say that there wasn't part of me that really felt deeply that, my heart was in unlicensed midwifery. It definitely was. That's kind of how I was raised as a baby midwife. I didn't see midwives responding to the government. I saw women make all kinds of choices at home. So having Margot, though, was divine and a huge support, and obviously, a huge piece of this amazing story that unfolded, which is 15 years of being best friends and creating this amazing business, right? So there obviously was so much divinity in that meeting. And I felt supported by her. There were a lot of students I could have taken on that, as I went through that battle with the state, said, see you later. I don't want to be involved in this. And that's essentially what every other licensed midwife in Arizona did. I had zero support. They were all scared to death that they would be next. And, I think the vibe there is still largely the same. I don't live in Arizona anymore, but this isn't a culture presently of really empowered women practicing midwifery. It's a culture of very fearful women that sort of haven't resolved their inner stuff. They want to be the good girls. They want to do it right. And they have all kinds of excuses for it generally, right? Like, oh, I get to serve more women, or this is my livelihood. Those are all valid reasons. But at the end of the day, they've signed their name on a license that says, I will choose the government over you. So they, have to look a woman in the face and say, I can't be your midwife anymore because, daddy says I can't, when the woman in front of you is like, what are you talking about? I'm fine. Like, I'll take the risk. I just want you there with me. So it's a huge, huge problem, obviously.
It's so un-American is what it really makes me think of. It's like, founding fathers rolling in their graves. It's disgusting in many ways. But I mean, so I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Patch Adams. Has that come across here? It's Robin Williams. It's a great movie. He's a doctor that is in medical school, and he's doing all the wrong things. He's actually putting the spirit back into medicine. And at the end of it, he's on trial in this medical school. And he's like, when did a doctor become more than a trusted and learned friend for somebody that needs your assistance or guidance? And I mean, so you're not in Arizona anymore. In
No.
Arizona, you can't practice midwifery without being licensed, or is there a way around it? Are there mechanisms around it?
Right. Well, that's a good part of the story. It is technically, is it a misdemeanor?
It's
I
a
don't
felony.
remember. It's a felony. Oh, sorry. It's a felony. Yeah, I gave it back, as I said, and I decided I didn't care. And, that's actually a huge part of our philosophy in the most simple way, is like, we're not doing anything wrong. We're serving women. And so I did find a way, around it, so to speak. I found out about private membership associations that many years ago, over 12 years ago, and I just took the leap. I didn't know if it was going to work. I talked to a couple of licensed doctors in Arizona that had done the same thing. They had given their license back or had it taken or whatever, and they were practicing this way. So under this private contract between people. And I decided just to go for it, and I was definitely a little scared in moments or not sure how it would turn out. But I worked for 12 more years in Arizona very openly without a license. And the state very much knew that I was there, and they left me alone, which I think was smart of them after what we had been through together. Because, I wasn't going to have it. But, and this is maybe an interesting segue or other part, is that the people in Arizona, that they were with me through this, my community, they knew the story. They were raising money for my legal help, all of this. They were aware of, now I had moved kind of into this new way of doing things. And over those 12 years, people really sought it out. And I think that was a huge inspiration for the creation of our school, to really see that people want this. This isn't just some weird fringe thing. People would ask me initially, other midwives even, oh, when you set up your private membership thing, did you feel weird about it? Like, did people have all these questions that you couldn't explain or answer? And the short answer was no. No one that pretty much that ever came, with very few exception, was confused. They didn't feel swindled. They wanted this. They came to me purposely. They were like, I don't want a midwife who has to follow the rules, or, we don't want to file a birth certificate, or whatever their reasons were. So it gave me so much encouragement. And that was a long time ago. I think there are obviously more than ever so many people now who are seeking out the services of midwives like us, or our students, very openly.
So how are you balancing, this work of, in guiding like people in the school, how are you balancing this work of having to do that inner work tied into something that's educational? Because that's a tricky piece to fit into something that is normally taught in this more like check off the boxes way that obviously the government has gone down that path. Because you only want to work with the people who are there to really do the work, which is not easy work. So what has been your process? How have you filtered that out, or has it been difficult?
I would say that the people that we attract to our school, which is the Indie Birth Midwifery School, really almost filter themselves out, because they have to find us and they have to be attracted to our work. And everything that we put out there is infused with both. Like, one of our taglines is, we're combining the science and the sacred, like always. It's never one without the other. They're always both, they're both always present in whatever it is we're teaching, whether that's something like nutrition, or we're teaching about postpartum hemorrhage, right? Like, whatever the case may be, we are bringing this alternative perspective to the table that's not leaving out anything important, is sort of how we approach it. So if they like that, they usually are excited to enroll with us. And once they are students of ours, it's, like I said, infused throughout the curriculum. We even have entire courses called, what's that one called? Wise Woman. What's it called? Anyways, the internal work is
metaphysical. Yeah.
Metaphysical midwifery. Yeah. Like, we have all of this like built in, so that, by the end of their time with us, that's often the feedback that we get. Like, this wasn't just a midwifery school. Like, this also changed my life and transformed like the trajectory of my personal path in this lifetime, in a really beautiful way. And so, Marin and I are both always learning, always adding. Like, right now, we're both kind of on this big learning journey. I'm studying internal family systems, which is parts work.
Yeah.
And so combining that into how we work with clients, pregnant women, and also using it to work with birth workers around, like, what are your fears? What are the different parts of you feeling as you are dealing with clients? And how could we just bring more balance and harmony and, goodness to all of that? And I don't know if you want to say more, Marin, about what you're doing, just because I think those are good examples too of like how we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you said it. Like, we are seekers. We're women that are constantly working on our own inner stuff. So I think it's natural that we would attract those women, as we're pretty open to sharing. I've had a podcast out there for 10 years, so people feel like they know me on many levels. That is weird. But, I do share a lot of that stuff. I feel like we've both been really transparent and continue to be on our journey in midwifery, because it's not always roses. Babies don't always fall out. We've both had really difficult experience as well. And I think for the most part, our students really appreciate that it feels real, and, it can be a divine calling. And that doesn't mean that it's not hard work. So I think just being who we are is always our best chance of just attracting more of the right people.
It seems very personal. Just you both seem like very humble, personable, and personal people, right? So a lot of people, it is ultimately at the end of the day a business, because anything that's done, it's hard work. It has to be. But it seems like it's very just natural, and I'm sure that's very comforting for people that want to get into midwifery. Midwifery. Midwifery.
I think both are
People say,
acceptable.
Yeah.
okay. So actually, Simon, and with our discussion with Kristen Nagel, spoke about the experience of the father in the birthing process. Can you actually, let's talk about both of them. So what on the spiritual and metaphysical side of things, what difference does it have, in your opinion and in your experience, for a woman to give birth in a free birth, natural birth? And what's the difference there, free birth versus natural birth? And also the experience of the father. What is your experience with fathers in the process? Maybe that's a lot there. Let's start with one thing. Okay. So the experience of the mother and what it does for mother empowerment and like the grounding of a mother and the relationship with a child and the connection. Let's speak to those first, perhaps. Don't all
Don't all go
no,
at
kidding.
once. I mean, I have birthed so many times personally in this life. So I have 10 children, and
you've
I've
also, sorry, the first one was not a natural birth. Is that correct?
it was a natural birth in the hospital, but
Okay.
there's a lot of descriptors around that.
Okay, but
there
so
were
there was a
interventions.
shift. There was a
Yeah.
shift there.
Yeah, and I'll say that what you're alluding to is really accurate, because the shift for me to having a home birth the second time came from the desire to not be separated from my baby. That was what it was. It wasn't honestly me, in a sense. I remember saying, I can do I can tolerate anything. I'm an adult woman, they can try to do whatever they want to me, but do not mess with my baby. So my first baby had been taken to the NICU without my consent. She was fine. That's highly traumatizing. And the more I learn now about the nervous system and attachment, it's not ideal. Obviously, I can't go back and change that, but that's not ideal for a human to start life on this planet that way. So my entry into home birth and midwifery was so mother focused. It was so focused on this attachment with this little being, that's coming in and wants to be born into love and not fear. And that's just something that I've been able to give the rest of them. So thanks to my first daughter, kind of sacrificed that for the good of the whole. The other 9 have had a really peaceful entry onto this planet. And I know that matters, not just for our family. They're amazing kids, but it ripples out, right? Like that's what we need to elevate human consciousness. So it's about, again, so much more than birth. The consciousness that is infused from conception matters, and it all matters. The woman's state of being during her pregnancy, all of these things are kind of adding up to the birth anyway. Birth is a mystery. It is highly unpredictable. I will say that. But if you're the one experiencing it, there's also a continuous sort of energy in each of my pregnancies. I could tell you about, what those different ones were and how it affected the birth. So that's my experience as a woman going through it, kind of in that more spiritual way, that each soul, each of my children, required of me what they needed for me to mother them. And that was the birth experience, that was the pinnacle. But the whole thing, the pregnancy, the postpartum, was that same energy. And, if we're talking about mechanized birth and being on an assembly line, obviously that's ignored. There is no sense of individuality for these human souls coming onto this planet. And they don't want to be treated like that. I think for the most part, they don't want to be born into like fear and terror. And that's why we have the problems we do in the world, is that we've been largely unconscious of how babies are born and the imprint that makes on them. So I don't know if that was at all your question.
Yeah,
but
absolutely. Absolutely. And the word trauma is really accurate. It's traumatic to have the, we can talk about C-sections, we can get there, but it's so unnatural. And, obviously if it's necessary, obviously there are circumstances where, these interventions are necessary. I'm assuming that you've experienced home births that perhaps became emergencies. Have you?
Yeah,
Is-
sure.
And I mean, at what point do you need to go to a hospital? Do you ever?
To fully answer that, you would have to take our entire almost 2-year program. But
I thought you were going to say you have to give birth, and I can't do that. So
Well,
you'll
that
never
too would
know.
help. Yeah.
yeah, that too. Yeah, no, that's a trick. I mean, it's a tricky question, but I guess yes, I have certainly gone with people to the hospital, and I think that's also something that's really different about what we do. We don't try to over romanticize birth and make it seem like nothing bad ever can happen or nothing undesirable can ever happen. And I think that comes from experience. So it would be, the desire to not be a liar. I would feel like a total fraud if I tried to sell that, even though that would probably sell our stuff a lot.
And people do. And
more,
people do try to sell that angle, right?
Oh
That
yeah.
I mean, it's
What
just like
perfection of
No, I
Yeah.
know
what?
women who have been deeply harmed by that and who had
Yes.
traumatic births because they went into it with that attitude and they were completely shocked and traumatized. It was not good.
Totally. Yeah. Like they're told this sort of fairy tale, like there's the two sides of the spectrum, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
birth is scary and medical and dangerous. But then there's also this other, the pendulum swung and people are like, no, it's always beautiful. It's always, it can be pain-free. It's safe. And like, as long as you don't do anything,
as long as you don't, yeah.
as long as you don't intervene at all or disturb the process, like it will be
Yeah.
good. Just trust. And so we definitely are somewhere in the middle. And, both have experiences working with people where like they absolutely did benefit from having access to surgery specifically, right? Whether that's a cesarean or, a DNC or whatever. And so, another one of our taglines is like all tools can be used in a sacred way. And so my ultimate vision would not be like everybody has a home birth or everybody has a free birth or everybody does whatever. It's like, how do we just like use the tools that are available to us in a way that honors the woman and the process and what she needs? And a lot of this comes down to like just a change in approach and a change in communication. And, something as simple as saying like, can I rub your belly? Like after the baby's born, typically in the hospital, they just like aggressively massage somebody's uterus. It's called uterine massage, but it doesn't feel nice like a massage typically does. At home, we either don't do that because it's not needed, or if it's needed, it's, hey, can I feel your belly? Can I rub your uterus? And, a woman that you have a good relationship with who trusts you will say like, yeah, sure. But it's the asking, it's the getting permission. It's not being coercive or forcing, or treating somebody like they're a meat suit who has no soul, right? So you can do the same thing, but do it in a different way. And it has a totally different feel and then a totally different effect. So, yeah.
So, a lot of this ties into the war on the family, because there does seem to be this overarching war on the family. And, a lot of that does tie into forms of neo-Marxism that have kind of evolved into different areas of our society. But, I've been studying this for a long time, and there is this overarching theme of attacking women's bodies, of this kind of disembodiment of women that then leads to a kind of collective disembodiment, because like women are the means by which, people are brought into the physical world. Like, it's like the matrix by which physicality, is sort of entered. And that's really important. If we are disconnected from that aspect of the feminine, we're kind of disembodied collectively because everyone's coming out so traumatized. Like there's a lot of layers to it, but the fallout is very real. And it does seem to be tied into this sort of war on the family. And that was how I found out about a lot of this. I was researching it from that angle, and that was one of the conclusions I came to. But I'm curious, what's your understanding of that, of this sort of Marxist angle that really is trying to disrupt the family for its own reasons, and the sort of politicization of all of this versus, the process of trying to point people towards embodiment and not really getting caught up in some of the noise that's surrounding that?
Yeah, so much.
Our questions
I mean,
are not as simple as
no, I love it. I love it. I know we both do. It's great to have meaningful conversation. I mean, agreed. Totally agreed. I think the goal of limiting women, of limiting birth choices, all of it obviously is big. It's very like wide reaching. And like you're saying, if the family isn't functioning, if the mother isn't functioning, then kind of no one is functioning. And that's, rippling out into the community. And that's definitely what has happened. And, I'm not saying women are to blame at all, but I think there is an accountability there too, where women just have slowly kind of allowed and stepped away and lost that connection with themselves. And, there's a million ways that it's kind of manifested for a woman and a family to be in a situation where they made this baby. Like, this still is always blowing my mind, right? Like, two people made this baby with their consciousness and with everything, and somehow very quickly they wind up both feeling like they have no idea what is going on or what to do or how this happens, when human life has been happening for eons. And on one hand, there isn't a lot to know. If we consider it this mysterious process, we don't know very much. We think we know how birth even works, but truthfully, if you see enough births, you get to the point too where you're like, I just don't know anything anymore. And I think that's a good sign. I think there's a lot of humility in that mystery. But yeah, I don't know that we actually know what's happening, but people aren't embodied, and the fear and the trauma response, like I shared earlier, that's happening very early. Like, that's happening at conception for some souls. They're taking that on. They're taking on ancestral patterns and lineages. So, I see it as it is the time now more than ever for people like us, perhaps, to, step into our own power and start healing our own wounds and our own trauma, and recognizing that that also heals the 7 generations in front of us and the 7 generations in back of us. And, I've seen it in my own life. I know that to be true. So I can't really control anything else, is how I feel on most days. Like, this is a huge collective problem, but it all starts with us, and it kind of all ends with us. And together, we create that change.
Right on.
Did you have something, Margot, you wanted to add there? Not to put you on the spot, just I thought that it looked like you were.
It was just making me think more too about, like, when you're saying it's not necessarily women's fault, but that we do need to all be taking accountability and responsibility. It's just making me think too about, like, how this has been multiple generations in the making, and how that's often a really hard pivot for women to make. So I have a lot of compassion for women who didn't feel similarly to me. Like, it was a definite, I came in with a real leg up when I had my first baby for a few reasons. One was that my mom always made it sound like it wasn't that big of a deal to give birth. She was just like, yeah, it hurts or whatever, and then it's over. You can totally do it. But the other was that I got to
true?
That it hurts and then it's over. It's not untrue.
Well, I'm going to ask you that in a second about the pain aspect of it. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. And then the other piece is that I got to witness so many births before I had my own baby. And that is what is so missing, because as women, we can inspire each other, and we can, transmit these incredible, like, codes really to each other by being with each other during birth. And I think that that's what has largely been lost. And, that's part of the move into the hospital. Yes, moving into the hospital was probably a bad choice in the first place, simply for the fact of what they were offering there. But also, it took birth out of the home. It took birth out of the community, and out of the social birth era. So previously, right, like in most cultures, women would have many women come and be with them. It wasn't just one midwife or one midwife and her assistant or whatever.
Like most women would have experienced somebody else's birth.
Yeah.
Before they'd given
And
birth.
most women, by the time they were, through puberty themselves, 13-ish, they'd start going to births too, because they need someone to haul water. They needed someone to whatever, cook, clean up, watch the other kids. And so they'd at least be tangentially involved and have probably seen a number of births before it was their turn, and maybe would have seen even a variety of kinds of births, so that they went into it with this larger, like, imaginal sort of library at hand. So I know that that's what I had to tap into. Like, on day 3 of labor, it was like, okay, I've seen other women do this. Like, I can fucking do this. I've seen it. I know I can do it because I've seen it. And if I hadn't, I think that would have been so psychologically challenging, that I probably would have thrown in the towel
I mean,
because it
scary for
was
sure.
hard. Yeah.
If you've never
super
even, I mean, the only experience we have seeing birth is in movies and stuff, and it's just
hard. Right.
that seems like you spoke about the history, Marin, or it seems like our collective history as a humanity has been purposefully, in some senses, or just naturally kind of erased, right? Like we perceive now that we know what's right medically and health wise, but we don't even think about us, of women giving birth for millennia. It's something that is we're very 21st century centric, is the way I put it. It's like we think that we know everything because of technology. Like now scientists and doctors, they know everything, right? But it's very artificial. And this idea, even the feminist movement was very artificial. Yes, there were natural grievances that needed to be addressed, but then it was funded by the Rockefellers, who also funded communism and also had a certain goal in mind, right? So I also have compassion for women and just people in general that fall into these conditionings and indoctrinations. You have people chanting stuff and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. That happens. Not everybody has the enlightenment experience that gets them out of that. But so there's a lot of work to be done, but at the same time, you can only do as much as you can do. And the fact that people are finding you and coming to you to it's not like you're like, come, we need midwives. It's right. It seems like it's happening a very natural process. Is that right? People are seeking you out.
Yeah, definitely. And along those lines, I know I gave it up many years ago, doing any kind of convincing. Like, I don't have discussions about hospital birth hardly ever. If someone wants my opinion or signs up for a consult, I'm happy to share what I think. But we're not out there trying to convert people to home birth or our way of thinking, because I think what you said is really true. If people are where they are, and that's just their reality. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with it. Everybody is allowed to be where they are. So I think we're kind of looking for the people that know that there's something else. They don't maybe know what it is, but they know they're kind of maybe missing something, or, they just have that feeling like there's got to be more. This has got to make more sense. But we're not we're not convincing them. We're just simply being like this beacon of light. And I think that's the most attractive thing for people that are, looking for that light. They just see it and they come our way, and it's usually a pretty good match.
One of the things that I've looked really deeply into in all of this is that one of the reasons the family has been attacked, seemingly, is its capacity to produce legacies, and that stable families over numerous generations create legacies. And family legacies, they outlast political cycles, they outlast media cycles, they outlast all the other forms of control and influence that we're, really facing quite intensely at this point in history. So I think that for people in the world who are seeking to centralize power and who are really against this movement towards sovereignty and individuality, I think that the family's capacity to produce legacy is a threat for a number of reasons. You seem to have tapped into that to an extent with what you're doing, because on the one hand, you're really seeking to pass on your legacy of knowledge and to create a legacy of birthing knowledge that is, as you said, this is not just to help the women, this is helping those children, and then epigenetically it's touching the future. But then also, we really, really, really need to preserve this knowledge this time, not have it really get lost. Do you have ambitions to have knowledge carried into family lines? I mean, is there a mindset in terms of mothers passing this on to daughters? How do you see yourselves in terms of being legacy keepers?
That's a cool question. I mean, I feel like I'm doing that within my own family. I have 6 daughters, and honestly, I don't feel that my sons are exempt from learning what the girls have learned, even about cycles and their bodies. My sons are, pretty well versed in that if they're teenagers. But, that's a huge part of it, is starting young, because again, it's not about birth. It's about our connection to ourselves and our bodies and this earth. And that's, something that is not taught, and maybe even purposely untaught with young children, right? So I think it can start really simply, because a woman that knows her body, knows her cycles, is really powerful. So not to get into all of that, birth control and all this stuff, but I keep it really simple for myself. Like, I get it in the modern world, but most of those things have come about because women have lost the connection with their bodies that tell them everything they need to know. And there is a power in deciding on a pregnancy or deciding not on a pregnancy, right? So there's so much that can be taught before we even get to this subject called midwifery. Although we've had women over the years enroll in the midwifery school with no intentions necessarily of becoming practicing midwives. They look at the work that we've done and this body of knowledge, and they say, I want to have this. I want to be able to pass this down to my daughters. This is important. And, we love that. You don't have to want to become a midwife. Anybody can enroll and learn this stuff, because it's in some ways common knowledge that's been lost. We're just putting it there in one place with our touch on it.
Well, and we've even had mother-daughter duos do our program together, which is really beautiful. And the other thing that made me think of in terms of like the legacy piece, personally speaking, is I know both your daughters and I have one daughter, have been to numerous births. My daughter's 10, and I think she's been to at least 7 births already. Probably most she doesn't have conscious memory of, but regardless, it's in there somewhere.
Well, like my daughter was a baby laying on the floor for Margot's daughter to be born, and they were on the phone all morning. They're best friends. So how cool is it that they have that energetic connection and memory of welcoming her friend onto this planet, like in a safe space. I mean, we have a picture of it, Margot laboring with her giant belly, and this sweet baby just playing on the carpet. Like, that's life. Like, that's community. That's what was natural. That was just normal. It's not even special, really. That's just how life went before everybody got all crazy about controlling everything.
Yeah, so it's crazy, right? It's like it's so natural and should be common sense, but it's just not. It's not present in our discourse, in our in just our lives. But like we said, in let's say older times before the Industrial Revolution, most girls and women would have experienced or would have been around birthing. And am I frozen? Of course I am. 1 second. Okay, there we go. And so the experience of, and I want to bring this back to feminism. One of the things, like today, feminism is like sexual freedom and hedonism, and it's a burden to be a mother, and I don't want to just be a vessel for a child. I want to, I don't want a man controlling me. And there's truth to, let's say, the patriarchal perception of the world, but the reality before the Industrial Revolution is that there was a very small minority of people that were very wealthy, the bourgeois, let's say, or the aristocrats and the monarchy, and the rest of the people were suffering together, right? 95% of the population of the planet were farmers before the Industrial Revolution. It's not like a husband and a wife, or mother and father, like the man is oppressing the woman. It's a team. It's a team sport, and it always was. But it's just this perception of it is this like patriarchal oppression of a woman, and there's truth to that, fine. But if you go back to different cultures, women were praised and women were seen as goddesses, and it's not this narrative that feminism has pushed is very artificial. And so point being that, well, going back to this idea of the community and localism, that is what America was founded on. It was founded on small communities have a representative that represents their issues and what they want out of a government. So we're representing ourselves and governing ourselves. That is completely lost in this modern metropolitan city. We don't even know our neighbors. it's all part of, and whether or not it's like designed or engineered to be like that, there is some aspect of it for sure, but it's also just a natural development of our human experience with technology and whatnot. But it really took the soul out of what it means to be human. And I think that you see the repercussions, like Simon's saying, all throughout society. In look at wars and the modern warfare complex. I can't even, why is that escaping me? But then the modern medical industrial complex, military industrial complex. Sorry, but so birth is where it starts, and if we can bring that consciousness back to birth, like Simon's saying, like you're saying, this legacy that can be carried on can really have an effect on humanity. And so that is what you kind of said, is this was kind of your calling, and how can you best serve humanity or help humanity forward? And this is an amazing way of doing it. Maybe you can speak to how that has affected you, or what your, the idea of being a midwife and teaching this initially was, and what it actually has been throughout your years.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly too speak to what you're saying around like the localism piece and like sustainable communities piece, because that's huge. And like I said, I was studying something else. I was studying criminology, but I was also taking a lot of sustainable communities courses in graduate school and at the end of my undergrad, with that question of like, how can we rebuild communities to be life affirming, positive places where people can be healthy and thrive, right? And that's when I got introduced, like I had said, to a lot of like the anarchist ideas and radical democracy, small scale, how that might look and work, those kinds of ideas. And I think that we see this licensing thing because of the lack of that, right? Like the reason that midwifery licensing exists is because we don't trust each other and we don't have any real community systems or apparatus to hold anybody accountable. So if some crazy lady is like, I'm a midwife, and she's out there like killing people, like we don't have a structure in place to take care of that outside of the government. And so it's like, well, yeah, so naturally we have that then as a result of these ways of thinking and approaching life and the Industrial Revolution, right? Like, and people getting separated and not knowing each other. So I think that's very much like, I'm a midwife and I love birth, but I also really love thinking about like, how can we rebuild in a new way so that we have these communities that are stronger, families that are stronger, so that we can trust that we could take care of this actually by ourselves. We don't need some random man in the capital to be in charge of the midwives in the state, because that's what it is here, right? Like there's some dude who's like in charge of chastising and fining and penalizing the midwives, who's not a midwife himself even, right? It's like ridiculous.
It's like the actual embodiment of the patriarchy.
Totally. 100%.
And there are probably some stark liberal as well who thinks that they're, some feminist, and this is
Doesn't see the irony. Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So I just think that's really important. And I think, I'm really inspired, especially, and I know Marion, you are too, like by the work of Charles Eisenstein, and just like, what would that look like? This more beautiful world that we know is possible. Like, what does that look like? And how does what we do fit into that? But to answer your other question, and I feel like Marion, you should weigh in on this too. I think we started teaching midwifery. We didn't talk about the origin of the school, but the 2-second version is people basically demanded that we make one because there was nothing available that felt aligned. There's a lot of really boring black and white medical midwifery programs out there. And there's like a couple like real like ultra hippie ones that don't teach any of like the real stuff. So we were sort of called to make this. They're like, when are you going to make a school? We were doing some really cool in-person conferences, which we don't do anymore, but shout out to Reclaiming Birth Conference in Canada. Mm-hmm. They're doing some really cool work. We did 3 conferences that were sort of similar back in like 2016, 17 and 18. And people were coming came to this first conference. They're like, when are you going to make a midwifery school? So that's where it came from. And I think for me, it's been as great as I thought it was going to be. Like, just so fulfilling to get really cool projects. We teach it in an unschooling way. So like, we have final projects for our courses. We don't care if anyone actually finishes them or not, but when they do, we do give them a certificate saying like, hey, they did the projects for these courses. But we're not grading people. We're not taking attendance. We're not like recreating this gross industrial version of schooling for adults. And so we get to see these cool projects and hear the stories of these women and see the way that like they're impacting their communities all over the US and actually all over the world. So I think it's gone swimmingly. But what do you think, Marin?
Yeah, it's really expanded into so much more, and we've even thought about changing the name of it because midwifery school on some days gets the point across, but it doesn't get our point across on some days because we feel like it's really more of a wisdom school. We really feel like there's a lot more, as we've shared, the whole self-development part and the spiritual part. Not everybody has the same beliefs, but we make space for whatever those are for the women that are enrolled. That is a part of this work. So yeah, it's much bigger than I thought it would be. And we're also really clear that we're not granting anyone this title of midwife either. So we're not certifying people. We're not licensing
It's like it's not the
them.
point, right? It seems
That's
like it's not the point.
It's like, who are you when you're done? And if you want to be in this role, because that's all it is, a role of midwife, then this school might really support you in creating that version of yourself. That's what we seek to do. I don't want mini Marins and mini Margos running around. That's not the point. The point is to create this woman that you want to be, that you can be. And so we're not saying you're a midwife. In fact, a huge part of being in the role of midwife is having the clinical training. You have to have the hands-on skills. Learning about birth isn't enough, in our opinion. So when our students are done with our program, they are highly encouraged to go get an apprenticeship or multiple apprenticeships. And, truthfully, not everybody does that. They are sovereign beings. They're allowed to do whatever they want to do, but it's why we're not granting them this title. We feel that that is a role and a title that is earned over time, just like it was in the old days, really, that the community at some point sort of bestows that on you based on your service to them. So again, that's just in such direct contrast to like, here's your certificate. This is what you are now. And I know for me, when I was handed that license, I didn't feel like a midwife necessarily. It took me many years to embody the role that I feel is right for me. So
Did you get that without an apprenticeship? Do you get the license just from courses, or you have a certain amount of, let's say, hours that you have to be an apprentice for?
Yeah, it's largely apprenticeship based, although in some places, you can do it really quickly in a clinic. So we're not talking about continuity of care for a lot of midwives that are being created. They are doing it really quickly. And I don't know. I don't agree with that
line
model.
style. Yeah.
Yeah. Like go down to a clinic. Oh, sorry. I hate this thing. Going down to a clinic, in Mexico or whatever, and just sort of cranking out your numbers is a very real way of becoming a licensed midwife or a certified professional midwife in this country. So yeah, we're fully against that. I mean, you can do that and that will give you some needed skills, no doubt. But this idea of relationship and taking it slow and learning yourself and, sorting out your own nervous system and also living your life probably, right? And having kids, like all of these things factor together so that this role of a midwife is this archetype. She is a part of the community and she is in it in that way rather than, just this like job that she does. It's not a job. It's really a lifestyle.
Slow midwifery as opposed to fast, just like fast food.
So
seems like that's what's the problem with most things we do. It's just pump it out. But yeah.
So I have to nerd out. I have a kind of deeper, nerdier question if we have a bit more time.
Do you guys have a hard stop time? Do you have to go?
My hard stop is if someone starts screaming.
Yeah, a few more minutes will work for me.
Okay, cool.
Perfect.
So I made this docu-series called Superorganism, and part of it was based on this idea of the family unit as a superorganism. And I just felt that that ideal was important in contrast to the way that the family was being attacked. That sort of culturally, we need new ideals surrounding family. And then, of course, also new ideals surrounding birth. And one of the ideas that I came into is really that, when a woman is having her first child, like, she's not just giving birth to a child, a woman is giving birth to a family. And that's the nature of the family as a superorganism, because all these interrelated connections really form on many different levels, on psychological and spiritual and energetic and biological levels. There's this intertwining that occurs based on the relationship. There's certain things that don't happen unless the man and the woman are very close through the process of the birth. But what have you seen in your personal experience, in your research, with this notion of this family unit as a superorganism, which kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier with the father? Because my experience is really that my deep sort of presence with the process, I went and researched that after and found that there were like deep hormonal changes and like very powerful changes to the father's body when there's a closeness with the process of gestation. So that kind of tuned me into this idea. So I'm curious what you may have seen or what your understanding of this idea of, the family as a superorganism.
Yeah, well, I'm putting in a vote for my husband to come talk with you guys if you want to talk about that from his perspective. I mean, he's been, at all of my births and has written about it. He's a writer. He has done made some content for us for dads.
Great.
Yeah, because he could speak to that best, just about what he's learned over the births and the years about his own presence and his own energy and what has felt valuable and how that shifts how he bonds to the baby and, everything you're talking about. I think he's figured out for himself in a way that works and has enabled us just personally, I think, to really reap the benefits of experiencing that in our own family, because even if it's not your first child, you are reinventing and recreating the family every time you add another child. And yeah, there's so much there just about the relationships. So I don't know. That's what I've got at the moment.
Nice. Yeah, we'd love to have him on, by the way, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like we didn't answer that question earlier, and I don't feel like I'm the best one to speak to it because I've had, like I alluded to earlier, sort of the opposite experience. But you had asked that question about like fatherhood and how the experience of birth can like, change things for a man. And I think Jason would be so good to talk about that. And like I said, I had a really different experience, which, I didn't divorce my ex-husband because of how he was at our birth, but it certainly didn't help. And very much, like there's even like video, right, of him just like doing stupid things that were like so unaware of like my needs, the baby's needs. He was like pressing on my back as I'm like pushing a baby out. And I asked him to stop twice. And he like didn't get it, like just wasn't in the moment enough to even recognize that he was being a hindrance while I was doing this thing. And so I think that the way the relationship looks, the way that a man is in his, like the adage is like, you birth how you live. And so I think that's true for the woman. I also think that's true for the dad. And so it just kind of brings everything into this really sharp contrast that makes it easier to see like, whoa, here's where some of these gaps are, that then you could afterwards maybe work to repair or, whatever, or celebrate if it was like, oh, that was really great how that worked and how we worked together during that time. So I think there's a real opportunity there for sure. And it's like, there's also the opportunity for a real fumble. Like, yeah. And I think that there's a lot of people who can't come back from that, especially if it's, we hear all the time women who come to us and they're like, I wanted a home birth with my first baby and he said no.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing it this time. And so there's this like weird tension or, and sometimes they come around and they rise to the occasion and other times they don't. And, it's especially interesting now because I started going to births in 2011 and Maren, you've been doing this even longer than me. And it's interesting to see which couples have kind of like made it and which ones haven't and sort of how that looked way back when while they were having these babies. Because I think some of them are pretty obvious where it's like, that's not going to work out.
Right. Like this is not going to make things better.
No.
I think, just lastly, the the point I'd like to throw in there just at the end here is that it feels like men don't realize their responsibility. And I don't mean that in a judgy way. It's just an observation, because I think you also have extreme power. Again, the conception just is feeling like really important to me lately, that men don't realize, like their set of beliefs and their own vibration and consciousness is part of this creation. It's so much more than we think. So as this woman is growing this baby, it makes sense to me, if I see it that way, that the man would also be experiencing all sorts of changes and potential connections, and even having to do his own deep trauma work, which I think Margot and I are both into in the ways we can be. I don't necessarily feel like that's why I was put on this earth. I think there are probably men that, can show up for that, with each other, to kind of do that pre-birth work of the traumas that are held, even your own birth, right? Because each of us have our own birth story that's held. So it's just more of a collaborative effort, in my opinion, than I see even in my own clients that I work with. We're just kind of culturally not there in a lot of ways, is what I feel.
Right on. Well, where can people go to get access to what you guys offer and follow you? We definitely want to get more people doing what you're doing, because from my understanding, there's this big war going on, and getting stable, beautiful, happy families into the world is like, that's the warfare, on our side. That's like the thing to be doing. So I really appreciate it.
It's like the opposite of their subversion. There's been a subversion for so long that we don't even realize how we've been conditioned.
Yeah.
That's happened from the ground up in the root, and just putting a family back together and reinstilling these values. This is like long-term warfare.
That's right.
Back against them, right? So sorry. Where do people find you? Actually, I have your website here. Let's take a look at it quickly, if you don't mind.
Sure. We have midwiferyschool.org.
Yes. This is always a challenge for me. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, I'll do over here. Just 1 second. And there we go. Stage. Okay. So indiebirthmidwiferyschool.org.
Yes.
And you have program curriculums, you have teachers, testimonials. I had seen something else. You also have doula.
Yeah, our domain names are a little bit of a mess, but yes, we also have indiebirth.org.
Yes, that's what I had seen before. Okay, here we go.
And then they kind of toggle back and forth between each other.
Gotcha. So you have your podcast here, doula courses, midwifery program. So people can communicate with you on here if they're interested in, they could just sign up for the courses directly on here.
Yeah.
Are they like video courses? Are they all like written courses? How does it?
Yeah, I guess we talked a lot about the midwifery school, but we definitely have one of the best, I think it's the best, doula trainings as well online. And all of our courses and programs are a mixture of like video, audio, writing, and reading for people to check out. They're all on like a really nice platform that our students have enjoyed for like the sake of ease. And then we also, in both our doula and midwife programs, have weekly live calls. So it's all, I don't want to say self-paced, and I don't want to get too into the weeds, but our midwifery school is not self-paced. It's on a schedule, but you're doing the coursework on your own. And then you have the live component on Wednesdays is what time it is right now. Wednesday mornings. I did the doula one this morning, but there was a midwifery school one too. And
yeah, I did that one today.
Oh, did you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And people just get to talk to each other. They get to learn from us directly. There's case studies, all kinds of really fun and really rich learning happens on the live components as well. So we have a neat community, and a lot of the women that come to us are like, I felt like the black sheep where I lived, or like I was the only one who thought these things. And the space that we've created is one where they realize that is not the case, and we can all feel kind of stronger together and learn and grow with each other.
Very cool.
Awesome. Yeah.
So we actually avoided talking about anything too controversial, so this can go on YouTube. Maybe if we can have you back on. So we spoke.
We
all
can do the
about
controversial version next time if you want.
next time we'll have you, and we'd love to have your husband on as well.
Yeah,
that'd be an interesting contrast, and because we've spoken about it with you now and with Kristen, and Simon has experienced this, so it'd be interesting. I don't have kids yet. It'd be interesting to see the comparison and whatnot. But yeah, we'll talk about the controversial stuff another time. And pleasure having you guys on. It's been very insightful and just interesting, and love what you guys are doing. Honestly, it's amazing to see.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We appreciate your time and your efforts, and it was a great conversation.
Likewise, this was so fun.
Yeah, you guys were great. How can I have him reach out to you?
Margot, I have you on Instagram.
Yeah,
does he have Instagram?
No.
I'll send you my number. I'll send you my number, and we'll figure that out.
Hook it up.
Sweet.
On to the next one. Okay, for people watching, thank you for coming this far, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.